with my microphone, but it worked right away, so that's great. So as I'm pulling some things up, and I'm sure this is a big question, does anybody have problems with what you've been working on for class?
Yes.
Anything specific that you would like to ask about, bring up?
Well, I was.
Sure.
Is it like stuff isn't late, right? Like so, like week 1 stuff that was like supposed to be due at 12 last night, we can still do it.
Right.
Because that average thing
It's horrible.
was
my God.
terrible. Like I
Awful.
can't get through the first part. Like, and I was literally sitting there for
If
like
you could find it in your heart to maybe just
hours.
do it more
Yeah, like that was
on
like
those
torture.
assignments.
How about average list 3?
Or something like that was like. Because I was getting like 8 in a row, 8 in a row, 8 in a row, 9 in a row, like right. But because I like got 1 or 2 the first like 2 or 3 times, it was the average just wasn't going up. It was like stuck, and I was like broke my laptop. I couldn't do this.
That was week 1 stuff that we're on, right? Yeah.
Yes, we haven't even started week 2.
So you have to unlock part 3, right?
What do you mean?
So we're also-
Like if we're late today.
So yeah, if you complete anything after after the due date, the score is not available for Blackboard to use to open up the next thing. I have to check it off. But let me take a look at.
Does that come automatically or to you, or do you do it automatically, or do we have to email you?
Actually, I'll demonstrate that in a second, but let me look up something and see if I can do this.
Average on the 3, like somebody said something, because that was like rough. It was terrible.
I know, right?
I was like
20 hours
on.
on
I was like, I can't
I don't think I've
the
drank
hallway.
as much as this week because I was so mad.
Okay, I was trying to find if there's a way, and I'll have to ask around about this, if I can set it up to drop like your lowest grade or something like that. It doesn't get factored in there. However, while I am sympathetic to your plight, do understand that I am doing this for a specific reason, which is, 2 reasons, which are you need to be very thoughtful about what you're putting in for your answers. And the repetition of doing them over and over again to get that average up is going to help your brain incorporate that information a little bit further. Okay. If you're drinking while you're doing this, then there's a concept in neuroscience called state-dependent learning. And so for you to be able to accurately recall things that you have learned, it's best to be in the same state when you have to recall them. So if you're going to be drunk when you're doing it, please stay drunk the rest of the time so you can anyways, I will see if I can find a way, because it's a little less than straightforward, to set it up so it can drop low scores. And I thought I saw that somewhere, but we had a new update this summer, so it might have changed the way that works. So I will look into that. Yes.
Would there be any way to maybe get rid of the 20-minute timer on the first 2, so that because I got a 9 out of 10 because I accidentally it booted me out after, and then if I just would have had the time to go through and read them again, I got it wrong.
It shouldn't boot you out.
I think I just hit OK and it booted me out.
Oh, then don't hit OK.
Well, either way, the timer is
So here's,
simple.
this is the part 1 assignment here. This is where I set the timer, and I have this option to turn on or off the auto submit thing, and I always leave it off. And off means the user is given the option to continue after time expires. So it is already set up so that you are not kicked off when the timer comes up.
So it was my fault I got booted out.
Yeah, so if it's giving you, see, this is the problem with I don't know what to call it, digital natives or whatever. We've all learned that when something pops up in front of you with an OK button, you don't read it, you just hit the OK button. So it might be that if you hit OK, that's kicking you off. You need to hit the other button.
So is there any penalty or anything for going over the time?
That is a decision I make. Well, I should say this. It does hold up your score on something. So I have to go in and check it off just like it was late. But if you consistently go over the time, then I'll have a problem. But if you go over a minute or two, or if you're doing a bunch of attempts and the first one, you take a long time, but then you get back to doing it in timely fashion, I probably won't have a problem.
Just because I want to take the time and have the time to look it over,
Mhm.
so I can.
Yeah,
get
but the timer there is there for a reason, which is on a multiple choice open book take home test, which essentially this is, if you're not getting 100% on it without a timer, then there's something wrong. And so the timer's there to put a little bit of pressure on you, so that you go into the assignment prepared, which you really should be doing anyway. So you should read this stuff ahead of time. When you come across a question, you might not know particularly which answer it is. You might be able to rule out 2 of the 4, and you just need to figure out which of the last 2. And if you've read, you know where in the material to go to get that answer. Okay, so that kind of preparedness is going to help you on those.
Do the quizzes average or no?
What do you mean the quizzes?
The
lab quizzes?
Lab quiz or
No, the lab quizzes,
Okay, that's-
because they are not drawing from a pool. You're getting the exact same questions over and over again. Actually, I mean, I guess I could set it for average, but
Everyone.
I'm not going to do that this semester. So you might have just ruined the A&P 1 students that are going to have me next semester, but you guys won't have to worry about that. Actually, my intention is someday to make those drawing from a larger pool, and they'd be the same as the others, but I haven't written the questions for that yet. So yeah, the direct answer to your question is on the lab quizzes, it's the final attempt. It's not an average of the 3, but then also nothing's dependent on that score. So it's not that you have to get it to a particular level. Other questions or concerns?
So wait, you said there was something about if we didn't finish week 1, you have to like go in. And
Oh yeah, let me show you that.
Something like that.
So normally I wouldn't want to open up a part of Blackboard that potentially shows everybody's work. I'm not going into the grade book. So I think what all of this is going to show is your name next to an assignment that you've done. It doesn't show your score. So if you take offense to this being up on the screen, I apologize, but I think I'm willing to do that for the sake of everybody understanding how this process works. So I have down here another menu, you guys don't have it, which is my instructor control panel. And under Grade Center, I can go to the full Grade Center, which I'm not going to go to because that'll show everybody how you're doing in the course. But I also have this needs grading thing. And when I click that, it just shows me all of the attempts that are waiting to be checked off. Okay. Well, it does show me, oh my freaking God. I've never, you win the prize there, Delmar. I've never seen somebody break 3 digits on attempts there. But
114 times.
Yeah.
Hey, I got everybody best.
So great, and my average does not go up. It's like 13 point and like 4 decimal points.
I thought I was.
right. Yeah. One problem with doing that many attempts is that every attempt you make, you're dividing the total points by a larger number. So mathematically, the additional attempts are actually making it a little bit harder to get that average up. So,
So your goal is to try to do it right. So yes.
yeah. So really, I had a feeling that this kind of thing might happen. That you need to understand that getting into these sorts of situations, I mean, yes, Delamar, oh my God. But even here, Stacy, you're up to 27 attempts. I know that can be a lot of frustrating work. There are two things to say about that. One, part of the point behind the average, using the average, is that you make the early ones count, okay? Especially the part 3 assignments, they are not timed, so you can open it up and you can work on it and you can spend all of the time that you can getting that first attempt right. And then when you submit that, if it's if you don't get a 16 that you need to go on, then you do a few more attempts to get it up. But if it's an approach where you're doing it without really thinking about how you're answering things or something like that, and you're not getting the kind of score that you need to, and so you're doing another attempt, mathematically that's going to get incrementally harder and harder because, again, you're dividing by more and more numbers. So what I need to do when I have time, and today's just been kind of crazy, this morning I went through and did it, but of course all of you were doing it late morning today, I suppose. I need to go through and click all these off. I'm not going to do that here, one, because it'll take up a little of our time, and two, it'll show everybody's grades, and I don't want to do that. So anyways, so this is what, when you do something late or if you go over the timer, this is what happens. I don't change anything. Delmar, do you mind? I'm going to open this first one, which is your last lab quiz, because I just want to show people exactly what happens. But you're welcome to say no if you want to, but being a lab quiz.
What is that, the one that I did today?
It's a lab, the autonomic system lab quiz.
Oh, yeah, I just went in for just custody.
Okay, so so this is what it looks like when I go in here. I open it up and I just have these buttons over here. I could click save next, or I could click save and exit, and I'm going to hit save and exit because it's not going to take me into the next one. But I can just sit there and with my mouse just keep hitting the button and it'll just automatically check off all of the things. That's how it works. I don't do anything to the scores because they've been submitted late or anything like that. But that's what I have to do. If I ever tell you that I'm checking off late work, that's what I'm doing. I'm just going in there and saving the score in the system so that you can use it, so that you can go on to the next thing. That's how that works. Now, it's not just this group. I've had students from other A&P classes bring up issues, and I want to talk about this assignment a little bit more. And in doing this, well, let me just do this. Okay, so which one do I want to start with?
The last one. Question 4.
Oh, yeah, that took me forever.
Well, let me just, I'm going to work through all of them a little bit and just say a few things, not necessarily address all of them. But probably the number one issue that students have when they're doing doing these and they're getting them wrong, I can almost always fix it by telling students something like, you're overthinking the question. Okay. So this first one actually, I get a lot of, and this is over years, semesters of using this question. I get a lot of students that are trying to put answers in there without really thinking about what it's asking. Okay, these are mostly definitions put in sentence form. So I'm just asking you, what kind of cell receives information? Okay. To some extent, the rest of the question doesn't really matter, except that it helps more closely define what the cell is. So if it's information from the environment, that means that it's stuff outside getting in, which means that it's what you're perceiving. Okay? And then transduction is the process of converting stimuli into neurochemical signals. So I'm just asking what cells do that, okay? Now, that's all the information that's in the sentence, in the definition. So it has to be a general term, okay? I often get answers here that people are trying to put specific things in there, okay? But you don't. And actually, the answer is technically already in the sentence in a different, as a different part of speech. Okay. So what's the answer here? Receptor. Receptor cells receive. Okay. Receptor and receive are essentially the same word. Okay. It's setting you up right there to tell you what it is. I think it also takes sensory, which is another way of saying something. Okay. This next one, I'm kind of amazed how people tend to answer this when they get it wrong. Okay. This again, and again, most of these fill in the blank questions are really just getting at what definitions are. And this is just what's the difference between a special sense and a general sense. I say that, not exactly the words that go in these blanks, but I say that several times in the presentation. It's in the book. It's plastered everywhere. The thing is that this question is actually asking you to take the information as it's always presented and make a little bit of a leap to apply that information, to synthesize something out of it. Okay. So who can define what a special sense is?
Smart.
No, that's not a definition, that's an example. Who can define what a special sense is? Now, there are two reasons why there's so little response to that question right now. One, okay, three reasons. One, you're shy and you don't want to speak up in class. Two, for some reason you're scared and you don't want to speak up in class, which are kind of the same thing. And then three, that you don't know the answer to that question. Okay. Now, if it's one, I can sympathize with you. It might not be very obvious from my personality these days, but I was certainly a reserved sort of student when I was young. If it's the second one, I'm actually kind of surprised by this on a regular basis, although I shouldn't be. I imagine I do come across as kind of intimidating. I'm tall, I dress kind of businessy all the time, that kind of thing, and for students that can often be intimidating. I have talked with some of my colleagues about that, and I agree with some that trying to dress a little less intimidatingly, I think is going too far in the other direction. Okay, there's a reason why I dress like this, and I think if I were to switch to sweatpants and t-shirts, it would completely undermine some of what I'm trying to do. So I might look intimidating, but in the syllabus, I put a picture of me from first grade, so you can see that there's a little boy right there inside of me, okay? So please don't be scared of me. Always feel free to do that. I recognize that when Mark said smell, and I immediately went to, that's an example, not a definition, that might come across as intimidating. I'm not trying to be rude, I'm trying to be efficient and precise in getting to answers. And then the third one, if you don't know, that's the problem, okay? If you aren't answering this question because you don't know the answer to what is the definition of a special sense, you're not prepared to do this kind of assignment to begin with, so.
I will say, like, this one I did have trouble on, but I went back in the book and it said specific organs. So I put that as one of my answers, but it, like, that's all it said. It didn't
Okay,
say much.
but the question I asked was who can define what a special sense is? We're not still looking at this specific question here. I'm working through the process so you can see how to answer this
Okay.
question. So who can tell me what a special sense is? Define what a special sense is.
Senses are
Senses.
specialized to organs, like specific.
Right. So that there is a specific organ for it. So Mark said smell. What's the organ for that? The nose. What's another example of a special sense? Sight. What's the organ for that? Eye. What's another example of a special sense? Hearing, which is localized to the,
organ, whatever.
what's the organ for that? Ear. Okay. What's another example of a special sense? Taste. The organ for that is tongue. Another example of a special sense. Is that a special sense? Okay. Touch is not a special sense, which means it's general. Equilibrium is a special sense. What's the organ for that?
Brain.
No. Ear also. Okay. So what's the definition for a general sense? Yeah, that it's spread across multiple organs. So as far as the definitions are concerned, you can see special is a special organ for that sense, and general is spread across multiple organs. Okay. So this kind of sentence, and often the two blank sentences like this, I construct like this one that we're looking at, which is it's meant to be a juxtaposition. Okay, so the first blank and the second blank are sort of like two sides of the same coin. Okay, so most people can get the second blank easiest. Okay, so we just defined it. General senses are distributed throughout the body, or organs is also acceptable there. Okay. Body is really the better juxtaposition there. Okay. And so if we're playing word association and I say the word body, what's another, what are you going to associate with that? Body? We're playing word association here. First thing that comes to mind when somebody says body. What? You're overthinking the word association. I say a word, you say the first thing that comes to mind.
Like different parts.
Okay, we're just overthinking this question. All right, let's not try that approach anymore. So let's just go to the definition. Special senses are the ones that have dedicated organs. Okay. So special senses have receptive surfaces located in the blank. Okay. So what were the examples we had?
Nose, ear.
So nose,
Eye.
ear, eye, tongue, and then the second one, the ear.
In the head.
They're all in the head. Okay, that's it. Special senses are located in the head, everything else distributed throughout the body. Okay. See?
It's because we overthink everything.
Right, so stop overthinking.
Well, how can you do
Researching
that?
like crazy.
Like some questions you have to overthink and you have to think of it from like a scientific standpoint, but then other questions, it's kind of like that.
I would say that's a scientific standpoint to think about it from.
True.
So brain wouldn't be the answer to that one either? 'Cause
None of them are in the brain.
None of the brain.
The organs we're talking about are all peripheral structures. Brain is central. So, in discussing this with somebody who I trusted very well, their assertion of the level of investigation they put into trying to find the answer to this, once they found the correct answer, looking back on it, nowhere that they went to find the information said that. Okay. And in thinking about it, it's because it's a self-evident fact about special senses, okay, to neuroscientists. You have special senses in the head and you have the brain in the head because all the special senses are right there next to the brain to deliver that special sensation directly to the brain. And the body plan is laid out for that reason. Now, humans, I can explain this in terms of humans, but it's a little easier to explain in terms of a normal four-legged animal body plan, okay, like a dog. Its head is in the front. That's the direction it's moving. So its nose, which smell is the most important one for a dog. Its eyes and its tongue and its ears are all pointed in the direction it's moving. So the body plan is built around the idea, or the senses are built around the idea that that's the way the body works. Okay. Now humans stand up on two legs, and so it throws that concept off a little bit, but still our eyes are in our head because that's the highest part of our body, so to speak. And for humans, we stand on two legs so that we have the ability to look far into the distance, okay? And our visual system is really set up for scanning the horizon. That's a lot of what the visual system does, responds best to that kind of visual input. So just the way that the body plan's laid out is optimized for the special senses being used that way. It's always the head is directed at where the brain needs to pay attention. So the special senses are there. But you're looking for one word to put in this blank, okay? And yes, special senses are localized to specific organs, but to put organs in for that one word in that blank doesn't work because you've dropped the word specific. And organ by itself is meaningless in answering that because general senses are distributed through organs too, okay? So you gotta think about what this part of the sentence is getting at. And you should, when you start to think about where they are, you should start to go, oh yeah, it's the nose, ears, eyes, tongue, which is all in the head. You should see that. And then also the juxtaposition, and nobody did the word association thing, but if I were to get a bunch of people off the street and ask them to do some word association, when I said the word body, I'm sure head would come up the majority of the time, okay? Just like if I said mom, the majority of the time people would say dad or something like that, probably. Those are just words that are often associated together. Those kind of juxtapositions are often built into these questions, okay? Now, this next one. Personally, it surprises me that people get confused by this, okay? But of course, I have the luxury of having written the question, so I know what the answer is. But I think most of the time when people get this wrong, it's because they're not really looking at the sentence and understanding what it's looking for, okay? Now, I sometimes talk about, actually I think it's in the book, I think I covered in the book about losing sense of smell, but losing sense of smell is not an unusual thing to have. Well, it's not that common a thing to happen, but it can happen quite a bit, especially with advancing age. The neurons that are receiving smell stimuli in the nasal epithelium have a limited lifespan because in the nasal epithelium, they're exposed to all sorts of potential toxins just in the air we breathe. So they will regularly be turned over just so that the toxins they're exposed to don't create bigger problems, which is actually very unusual for neurons. But sometimes with advancing age, that ability of those neurons to regrow is lost, just senescence, and cells stop being able to grow so well. And so it's not uncommon for people of advancing age to lose their sense of taste. Okay, that's sort of what it's setting up. So if you can't smell, your experience of food is severely compromised. Taste is a very limited sense. There's only the 5 stimuli that it works with, okay? And when you say that you're tasting food, you're really experiencing more of the smells that are associated with it. In the presentation, I touch on that a little bit. I talk about orthonasal and retronasal, and sort of painting the picture in terms of eating. So as food's coming up to your mouth or whatever, you can smell that food, and then as you're eating it, odors from the food make it into the nasal cavity from the back right. So I sort of set that up. It's tied very much to dealing with our enjoyment of food. However, if that is removed, if, you know, somebody loses their sense of smell as if, you know, with advancing age, if you can't smell food, what do you have to do to enjoy that food, to make it season it? What does it say in the sentence? You put salt on it, okay? You got 5 tastes. You could put sugar on the food also, but most foods would be really disgusting if you added sugar to it. You know, if you go to get a steak, you're not going to sugar that steak to make it taste better, right? You're going to put salt on it. Nobody wants to put bitter things on to improve taste. Now, actually, we do put a lot of bitter things on food to improve taste because they're aromatic. And so the scent of herbs and spices and that sort of thing improve our enjoyment of food. And we don't notice the bitter taste there. But if you can't smell those things anymore, you know, putting rosemary on your meat to improve the flavor, you're going to just taste the plant bitterness of the rosemary. And that's not going to be very useful. Sourness, you really don't add that to improve anything's flavor except for, you know, Sour Patch Kids or something like that. Because it's acid. It's going to make it taste more acidic, more bitter. Nope, sour. And then umami, it's really kind of hard to explain that. I mean, the savory sense isn't something that's so immediately apparent as saltiness or sour or that kind of thing. So you don't really do that to improve taste. It's really more of how you perceive what the food itself is made out of, usually protein, that kind of thing. So this sentence is setting up, if you've lost taste, you're going to add salt to your food, okay? And so the blank is just in in a phrase that's being described by the, I don't know what you call that grammatically, but that little fragment there. So this is telling you that you season it with some kind of stimulus, and it tells you such as salt, okay? I sometimes get people who put salty in that blank, okay? And I can kind of understand the point of somebody putting that in there. It's actually, I'd say, in the right neighborhood of the answer. It's a taste stimulus. It's just that it doesn't make any sense. Who would ever write a sentence that says, to season with a salty stimulus such as salt, okay? So you're modifying what kind of stimulus this is by describing it as salt. Okay, so it needs to be a little bit more general than the word salty. Okay? And of course, you wouldn't put bitter, sour, or sweet in there, or umami, or savory, because that doesn't make any sense with salt. While salty kind of does make some sense, except that it just doesn't make a very good sentence. Okay, so therefore, what would go in that blank to make sense and be properly modified by the little fragment there, such as salt? That's too general, okay? Because smell is also dealing with chemical senses, okay? If you put a chemical stimulus on the food, I mean, that's just not describing it. Salt is what kind of stimulus specifically? It's a taste stimulus. That's all it is. The point of the sentence is, can't smell, all you've got left over is taste. And I'm showing you, you'd use a stimulus that is a taste stimulus, okay? Putting salty there is in the right neighborhood because it's a taste stimulus. It's just not the right answer because the sentence already says salt, and it doesn't make sense there. So you have to back off from salty. Backing all the way off to chemical is going too far because chemical is actually incorporates smell and taste type stimulus. But you need to be, taste is a better answer for that because salt is a taste stimulus. Salt isn't a smell stimulus. You don't smell salt. Okay. Now, this next one, which I know a lot of people want to hear about, is completely covered in the presentation, okay? I don't say it explicitly as this sentence, but it is directly out of the presentation, okay? One thing about that is I explain what sensory modality means, okay? It's really just another way of saying sense, but just a little bit more precise way of saying it. And I say I use this term sometimes, just understand that you could say sense in that, for that, and it would mean essentially the same thing, okay? And then I spend a little bit of time talking about hair cells, okay? I get some variety of answers to this, which surprise me, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm going to search for what hair cells means. I've never actually done what I'm about to do here, but think of this as a resource that you should make use of, okay? All right, so Wikipedia page about hair cells. Okay. A number of pictures about hair cells, okay? Baylor College of Medicine page about hair cells. Come on. Okay, that's all text. 2 kinds of hair cells in the cochlea. That's text. Also Baylor. Okay. So I went through those links real quickly because I've never actually done this search or checked those links, and I certainly could go further down, but I'm satisfied with what I've done here to be able to say this statement. Just searching for hair cells, it very explicitly tells you what hair cells are, okay? And I was scanning through these quickly, actually looking for artwork, and looking for pictures like this, or this. And if I go back to the pictures here, so these are kind of the same things. Here's a good one, another one. All of these are showing you what hair cells are, okay? Now, I will sometimes get as an answer in for one of these, smell. I don't know why that answer's in there, okay? I don't know, well, I should say that differently. I don't know why students are willing to talk themselves to putting that in there, okay? A cell for the sense, nope, yeah, that's right. A cell for the sense of smell, thought I said smell there twice, is an olfactory neuron, okay? And I'm just scanning around real quick here. I don't see them, but here's your basic picture. And it's in German, okay. But the only thing I can think of is that people see pictures like this and they see these hair-like extensions. Now, just as an aside, this picture is technically upside down. This would be the inferior and this would be the superior orientation for this picture. This is the roof of the nasal cavity. So the nerves coming off here are going up into the olfactory bulb, just to place these things a little bit. Wait, I thought it just, isn't this one just clicked on? Yeah, this is in English. I don't know why there's a German picture for it there, but I didn't click on this one because you don't see those hair-like things down here too well, although this one's oriented correctly. So the only reason I can think that students will sometimes put olfactory cells or the sense of smell down there is because they see hair-like things coming out of the cells, okay? And think, oh, that means that's a hair cell. But I did this search specifically for the term hair cell, and all of, at least the first screen's worth of results point to a very specific kind of cell, this kind of cell. It's called a hair cell because these things sticking out of it, which we see in this little micrograph up here, look like little hairs. Okay, that's where the name comes from. Yes, there are things that look like hairs on the olfactory neurons too, but they're not called hair cells. Okay, so so if you're having trouble figuring things like this out, be sure that you understand the whole sentence that you're completing or the question that you're answering completely. Okay, so it's not just, it doesn't say hairy cells. It doesn't say cells with hair-like extensions. It specifically calls them hair cells. So be sure you understand what that means. And I, in seconds, brought up a whole host of sites verifying that hair cells are specifically those things. Okay, so knowing what hair cells are, where are they found in the body? What? Oh my God, I'm sorry, but no. Okay, hair is found coming out of your skin, sure. But I'm gonna go back here and show you these pictures again. Okay, all of these cells here that I'm showing you, okay, they're all from the same place, which, Shade, you said it?
I said the ear.
Yeah, they're found in the ear, okay? And also, oh, shoot. I'm tired of trying to do that. I'll go to that in a second. I'll point out what I was going to in the presentation in a sec. But anyways, so yes, they're in the ear. Okay, we ran through the examples of special senses earlier. Which ones are localized to the ear? Hearing and balance. Now notice that this says use the formal names. So what's the formal name for hearing? Audition. And for balance, which actually said equilibrium. So the point is you need to put those words in because those are the formal names. Okay. But those are the ones that use the hair cells. Hair cells are things that are found just in the inner ear, and the inner ear is responsible for that. Okay. Now, I had some people with problems for this question right here. And the problem that usually comes up for this question is the same one, which can be solved quickly, well, somewhat quickly, by pointing out that you need to read the syllabus completely. Okay, I said a little bit ago, but fill in the blanks are designed to have a single word put in there. Okay, when people have problems with this question, it's usually because they're trying to put multiple words in. Okay, if you know that you're only putting one word in here, it makes this question a lot easier. Okay, so the question is asking which of the two photoreceptors, okay? And the reason why people tend to have problems with this is because they try to put the names of both photoreceptors in, okay? But right there, it's telling you which of them, okay? So I'm asking you to pick one of the two as an answer, okay? And then it's setting up, you know, you're looking for your cat that slipped out the door at night, which means what about the environment you're trying to look around in? It's dark, right? So you need which of the two photoreceptors is specialized for low light sensitivity. Okay. Right. So too often people try to put in rods and cones. Okay. Don't use your cones to locate a cat in the dark. Okay. Because cones are not active in low light situations. They don't get enough stimulation. Okay. If you're doing it with a flashlight or something like that, then yes, the cones will be active, but the question doesn't say anything about using a flashlight. just says at night. So it's setting up that this is about low light situations. So if you're putting rods and cones in here as an answer, one, understand that the point of the blanks is that they're a single word. By setting it up that way, it makes it easier for me to set up the scoring. If it could be any number of words fit in that blank, then I've got to come up with an infinite number of possible correct answers. But if it's just one word, then I can be more finite about what's acceptable answers. Okay. And two, read the questions carefully. Make sure that you understand what it's looking for. Okay. So I don't normally go over this in so much detail, but I do want people to understand that. I will expect that you approach all further Part 3 or Part 4 assignments with this kind of approach in mind. Make sure you understand what the question's asking you. Make sure you understand all of the terms used in the word in the question, like hair cells. Understand what that means specifically. Make sure that you understand that you're trying to find a single word to fit in the blanks. And oftentimes, especially for sentences with two blanks, they're meant to be juxtaposition. They're meant to be two things that go together, like apples and oranges or something like that. And I'll forewarn you, if you haven't gotten to it yet, there's a question in the autonomic system part that is built the exact same way. And if you understand that it's one complete sentence looking for two words that are part of the same thing, it should help you a little bit. Too often people get the first one right because it's obvious from the setup in the sentence, but then they get the second one wrong because they suddenly think they're answering a different sentence and they go into a completely different area. And stay in the same area. The whole sentence is about one thing. So, okay. So I did want to go to the presentation to get back to that hair cells thing. I'm not going to play the audio. Come on. Any day now. Okay. But here's where it shows the starts to talk about audition. There's a little inset here where I describe exactly how hair cells are mechanical transducers because of this physical connection here translates the movement of the stereocilia to opening of ion channels. And then we go to here, and I again say these are the exact same hair cells here in audition in equilibrium. So in that section of the presentation, it said that explicitly. This is a hair cell. This is another place where hair cells are used again. Okay. It didn't lay it out as that sentence, but it was right there in the presentation. Okay. All right. So before we go on, having spent some time looking at that kind of thing in depth, any further questions or concerns based on that stuff? Okay. So let's go on to today's stuff. Okay, so for today's material, we're in the autonomic system. There is a presentation for that too, which I expect you have already watched. If you haven't, you're going to have to struggle a little bit today to keep on top of what we're doing. You might have to go back to make sure you're comfortable with things. I am recording what we're doing today, so if you're struggling to keep up today because you haven't seen the Prezi, you can go back and fill in with that information and revisit what we're doing today, and hopefully it'll make more sense. Okay. Now, what I want to do today is actually not in this folder. I'm going to direct you, well, it's going to be on the screen, so you don't have to physically do it yourself. But we're going into the week 7 folder, which is about the practical. The practical is the laboratory exam. Obviously, if you are in A&P 2, which you are, you must have taken A&P 1. If you took A&P 1 from me, then you know about practicals in my class. But if you took A&P 1 from somebody else, then I'm sure that your practicals were different than what I do. Now, the common style of giving a practical exam is in the laboratory room to set up stations, usually, 25, 50 stations around the room. And you come in as a student, you get the test, and you get an answer sheet, which may be a bunch of blanks that you have to write words in on, or it might be, a Scantron sheet for multiple choice or whatever. And you physically move through the test from station to station. Okay. I know of one of my colleagues that does it a little different, who does a one-on-one oral practical exam. And if you had that, either you loved it or I'm terribly, terribly sorry. And if you didn't have that, be thankful. It seems to me like it would just be the most stress-inducing way of taking that test. But it's the way that colleague's done it for a long time, and so and he's got his way of doing it. And some students like that approach, and some students don't. And I was talking to a student in my class yesterday who's retaking A&P 1 because she didn't like that very much. But the way that I do practical exams is different. I'm moving towards the understanding, and I haven't explicitly stated it this way, that the practical exams are getting to be a way for me to design having tests over multiple things at once, if you will, sort of comprehensive type tests. You have two of them. The first one is in week 7, and the second one will be during the final exam period for this course. So they're comprehensive only over half of the class. Okay. I provide you with an outline, which I wrote a long time ago, like probably 7 or 8 years ago. I'm not really an outline kind of person, but I know students have sometimes ask for them. So I put it together. It's just a bare bones outline of what has been covered in the first half of the course, or what will have been covered in the first half of the course. If you're the sort of person that likes having outlines, it's there for you. But I'm not an outline kind of person, so I don't know if it's really that useful for students or not. And then there's also a document here of cases. And this is sort of the basis of what the test is about. Okay, so I'm moving away from the more traditional practical approach, practical exam approach, where you move around and you answer questions about specimens from class, which is based on the medical school anatomy course, where you dissect a cadaver and then you're answering questions about the dissection and saying, okay, that thing there is such and such a muscle, and that thing there is such and such nerve, whatever. And so what a lot of my colleagues do is a modified approach to that, using the models and whatnot that we have instead of a cadaver. And sometimes, depending on my colleague, it might be that they have fetal pig dissections, and you answer questions about that, or dissected sheep's brains or cow eyes or whatever for specific things. But I don't really see that as entirely appropriate for what you're training for. And so I'm moving it to more of a clinical-based approach. And so I have these cases here. The practical test, the way that the test is organized, has two parts. There's an in-class portion and there's an online portion. So since we're on Blackboard here, what we see here that says practical, this is the online portion. Of course, there's not going to be something on Blackboard that is the in-class portion, because by definition, this is online, that's in class. In case you're curious about this, I'll just explain it. It's practical 1, the first practical of A&P 2. That's what the 1.2 means. And the outline is numbered that way. And then for the cases and the online assignment, They have an A after them because I have two versions of this test that most often I use the version that we're going to have that's here for this semester, but every so often one semester I'll switch to using a different one, which just has different cases. But I'm not doing that now. The in-class portion is 50 multiple choice question test about the cases. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that today. I'll explain it in more detail. I think the day that we do the heart stuff, or maybe the blood, I'll talk about it then. I'm just getting closer to that date so you have a better idea of what to expect. But the in-class portion is 50 multiple choice question test. And then the online assignment here is questions very similar to Part 4 type assignments. If you're curious, you are welcome to open this assignment up anytime it's there. It's an active assignment. It is like a Part 4 test in that you can open it, save your answers, and come back. So you don't have to do it in one setting. So if you want to look at that assignment now, which is premature because we're nowhere near that part of the semester, but if you want to look at it, you can open it up and the system will consider you that it's in progress, and so you can go back to it later on when it's appropriate to work on it. But if you want to look at it ahead of time, feel free. It's there to be looked at. And I will talk a little bit more about that when we get closer to the date also. What I really want to do today is to get into the cases here. So I've just clicked on that link, and it takes you to a document which I host in my Google Drive. So it's essentially a Word document type thing that you can print out, okay, if you so desire. There are 4 cases on this, and we're going to talk about case 1 in some detail today. But the 4 cases cover all of the material that we'll do in the first half of the semester, okay? So case 1 that we're going to be talking about today is about the autonomic system. Case 2 is about the endocrine system. Case 3 and 4 are about the cardiovascular system, which we'll be doing. So this is week 2, endocrine is week 3, and the cardiovascular system is weeks 4, 5, and 6. So there's 2 cases about that. So across those 4 cases, we cover all of the material for this first half. And what I want to do today is explain how to use a case, how to get information out of these cases to use in this class. And I will, at the end of the day, I'll come back and say a few things about all of the cases after we've done this with one. You can kind of think about what to expect. But we're just going to look at case 1 here today. Now, the idea behind using case studies like this in this class is to set up a real-world example of how the basic anatomy and physiology of the course, how the basic anatomy and physiology that we're learning in this course I've talked myself into a corner, I'm sorry. To understand how the basic, okay, that's the way to say it, fit into a real world example. So by thinking about this clinical case, we can stop or step back and say, okay, what does the anatomy of the brain and the peripheral nervous system have to do with this case, and how do the functions of those structures have to do with this? The basic anatomy and physiology are represented. Now, I have a suggestion, and when I give a suggestion, I would take it as a very strong suggestion of how to go through these cases. I'm actually going to write it over here. I usually use that board, but I didn't realize that it's been chewed up so bad. It's sort of a 3-step process to make sense of these. Obviously, you're going to read the case. And in reading the case, you need to be sure that you understand the terminology, which is you have to understand what you're reading to get any sense out of it. Now, terminology is more than just definitions, but you should certainly understand the definitions of the words that you're reading. So if you don't, you're that far behind the point of getting information out of this. But you also need to consider the specific use of some things, which the best way to say it is jargon. Just that certain terms are used in medicine that mean something very specific. Like blood pressure. You might know what blood means, and you might know what pressure means, but the two of them together mean something very specific. Now, probably most people understand what blood pressure means, but and I use blood pressure because it's something in this case. But just as easily, I could have said, you know what hair means, you know what cell means, but hair cell means something very specific. And in fact, hair cell does not refer to actual hairs at all, but rather that they have a hair-looking thing on them. So you need to understand the specific meanings of certain things, okay? It's not uncommon in science for terms like this to be two nouns, like hair and cell, or blood and pressure. And from a grammar point of view, the first word is modifying the second word. So what type of pressure is it? It's blood pressure. So if you see something that is a single term like that, it's made up of two nouns, it's a good clue that that's probably a jargony kind of term that you need to make sure you understand. Okay? Because that noun modifying a noun approach is not uncommon in science. It's grammatically a nightmare, but it's common in how terms are generated. It's not just a science thing. You know, task force is a good example of a noun modifying a noun. And in that case, it's not a very good term anyways. But it means something very specific depending on what situation you're using it. So you have to be aware of those kinds of things that are jargon. Also, you need to be aware of abbreviations. What does LDS mean? Sometimes I ask that, and nobody thinks really LDS. Yeah, so I've asked that question before, and I've caught people off guard because when they hear the letters, they don't quite go, oh, that's pounds. Yeah. But that is that. Do you know why that's pounds? Does anybody know why LDS means pounds? Yeah, it's something like that. The Latin word for, well, it's from the Latin word libre, or something like that. I don't know the exact Latin word that means pounds, but it came from that. That's where the abbreviation comes from. So I doubt anybody actually needs to look up what that stands for, but there aren't a whole lot of abbreviations here. There may be abbreviations in other cases that are a bit more medically relevant. I mean, I could have, I suppose, gone with BPM too. What's that? So, again, in this case, there's not really a lot of abbreviations to worry about. There is an abbreviation that will come up later on, and I'll make a point that you need to pay attention to what abbreviations mean in the context of the case too. Okay? So make sure you know all the abbreviations and that you can read the case completely in the context of it being a medical case. So make sure you understand the jargon and the relevant abbreviations. Okay. Then you need to look at the symptoms and signs. Now, I used to just say symptoms here, but technically symptoms and signs mean slightly different things. I don't care exactly how they mean different things. I'm getting at the same kind of thing. Technically, it's a symptom if the patient complains about it. It's a sign if the evidence comes from something else like a text. But really what I mean is look at everything that's described as going wrong here. This is the physiology part. Okay? What functions are compromised in this case? That's the idea. So I want you to look at the case. It's basically a story. A guy goes into a doctor's office and makes a claim. And so from reading the case, any of these cases are essentially a story like that. In reading the case, you want to pull out a list of the things that are the compromised functions. Okay? Those are the symptoms or signs. Okay? And use any information in here. Again, this particular case doesn't have a lot of information, but it could be, again, the complaints that the patient brings forth. It could be test results. So those two things are the most directly symptoms and signs kind of definitions. But use everything to have in here. So, again, this case doesn't have what I'm about to suggest, but if the patient is on medications, they're on that for a reason, which is probably to address a functional shortcoming. So pay attention to that. I use that, I have a case that I use in AP1, which the patient is on an insulin drug. Why would somebody be on an insulin drug? Diabetes or high blood sugar. Now, it's actually stated explicitly in the case anyways, but that kind of thing. Or, no, that's a good example. So pay attention to the medications. They might give you some additional information. Also pay attention to any history. Okay, sometimes there's a functional shortcoming, if you will, and that's my new term for what we're talking about here, that's not on the table in the story. You know, the guy goes in the doctor's office and says whatever. There might be some history that's relevant to that. And if there is relevant history, then that'll be included. And oftentimes, I'll put statements in like, there's no significant history, family history, to just rule out all of that stuff. If something is mentioned specifically in the case, it's probably there as a clue. Conversely, if something's not mentioned, don't think, well, maybe that's a trick that's in here. And I'm going to give you all the information you need in the case. Don't think, well, it could be such and such is going on, but we don't really know, whether he's got a rash or something like that. If a rash is relevant, I will mention it. There's no hidden information there. And then finally, I want you to think about the systems that are involved. Okay, so this is the anatomy. Okay. You've come up with a list of functions that have been compromised. And so what you want to do is make a list of the organ systems that are involved in that. Okay. Now, the best way to do this, and we'll model this for this particular case today, is to just make a list of all the symptoms that are described in the case, and then for each symptom or function that's compromised, say which organ system that is. Okay. And always start off with just the most straightforward aspect of it. You're not trying to figure out what's going wrong here. We're just trying to say what is the physiology and anatomy of the case. Okay, at that stage, that's all we're looking for here. So we're going to look at this case and actually go through this approach so you can sort of see how it works. That's what I expect everybody's going to do going through these cases, to use them in class in the situations we have, like in the practical exam. We are also today going to go beyond that to understand as much about this particular case as possible, because we're also using this particular case to get to know the autonomic nervous system in a little bit more detail. Okay. And there are a couple of other times this semester that we will use a case study approach too. I have other case studies besides the ones that are in this document here, or the one for practical 2. There are other case studies that I have prepared that we're going to work on in classes sometimes to understand other organ systems. So what I want to do today, good, is I want to give you some time to read this case, which you may very well have done already, and then we'll have a discussion about the case built off of that approach that I just went through over there to begin with, so that everybody sees the kind of information I'm looking for. And from the information we get from that, we will then be able to describe or investigate what's happening in this case in a bit more depth, and therefore understand more about this organ system, okay, the autonomic system. Okay. So this is a perfect time to take a break, right? No, wait, is it? Yeah, if we start at 1:30, then coming up on 3 is a good time to take a break. So let's go ahead and take our 20-minute break. I'm going to leave this up on the screen, and so if you haven't already, I expect you, by the time we come back in 20 minutes, to have read through this and be prepared to talk about it based on what I wrote over there. So to give you a little bit more than 20 minutes, and just because I have this sort of OCD need for the big hand to point at an actual number, be back in here by when that clock says 1/4 And when you're back in here, you should have read this and be ready to talk about it. So you can take 20 minutes and then take a few minutes to read it, or read it and then take a break, whatever it is. Be back in here by 1/4 by that clock there.